for all of us, and no one escapes. There are people at times who manage to injure us. For many, this involves some significant injury by one or both parents. For some, this includes injury by siblings or friends. For others, this involves injury by a teacher or a boss. But no one escapes without being harmed. The question that presents is how to deal with this injury. And for many, we find ourselves unable to move on. The injury grips us like hands around our throat and makes it, at times, nearly impossible to breathe. We harbor a corrosive resentment of the other. We feel our veins boil with rage at the cause. We feel beneath the anger a deep sense of helplessness. Helplessness to change what has already occurred. Helplessness to go back and reconstruct history. In this state of near breathlessness, in this state of boiling rage, in this state of deep helplessness, we judge the other as flawed. We judge the other as criminal. We judge the other as in some way essentially wrong. And that judgment of who they are sticks in our throat and keeps us from being able to imagine forgiveness. In this state of suffering, dreams of retaliation fill our mind, and we fantasize about the other feeling our pain, fantasize about the other suffering as have we, but now at our hand rather than theirs. The irony here is that it is we who suffer most in this instance, because we cannot move forward from the memory of the injury. We cannot get on in the aftermath of the event. We cannot proceed to live the rest of our lives. So, what to do when we have been injured? What to do when we have been harmed? What to do when some terrible event lies in our past, cannot be changed, and keeps us bound in a dream of revenge? One part of the way out of this bondage is by bringing our capacity to empathize into play. Not to empathize as a means of denial, but to empathize as a way of imagining the context out of which the other's actions arose. It is hard when we are the victim to imagine that those who have victimized us have themselves also, perhaps, been the victim. Every parent was once a child, and as a child may have been injured by their parent. Every friend grows up in their family. Every sibling, every teacher, every boss as well. All of us begin as helpless infants in the world. All of us begin without the power to protect. All of us begin vulnerable and weak, thrust into the context of the families that bear us, thrust into the context of siblings and friends, thrust into the context of school and employment. By the time those who injure us are in a position to cause harm, it is likely, maybe even inevitable that they too have been harmed and lack the awareness to process their pain, lack the capacity to move mindfully through it, and so perhaps find themselves expressing their rage that grows out of a wellspring of helplessness that is steeped in the harm they've received, all of which pours itself with aggression upon us. So, to draw upon our power of empathy, to imagine the context out of which those who have injured us arise, to imagine with compassion the nature of their experience, even as hard as it may be to conceive, to bring love to those who have caused us great harm, love in the form of accepting them as they are, simply because there is no other choice, because they are as they are, and they are as they must be in this moment and as they were in the past, not without hope or possibility of change, but the past cannot be altered, and the present is as it is. Only the future can be potentially transformed if we bring skill to bear on ourselves, if we bring skill to help those in pain. And so, rather than the judgment which condemns the essence of the other, rather than the judgment that assigns a terminal value to those who hurt us, to be able to bring a discerning sensibility, to be able to bring the capacity to make out what is troubled without condemning it in perpetuity to failure. If we can bring our capacity to discern infused with a willingness to accept the past as it was, and with the capacity to accept the present as it is, that is to say, to bring the acceptance of love, if we can find a compassionate mind that is filled with the attunement of the empathic concern, then perhaps the hands that wrap around our throat and choke us with the boiling rage of resentment, the fantasies of retaliation, and the unwillingness to forgive, perhaps we then can find our way to forgiveness. Forgiving those who have harmed us, their tragic lack of skill. Forgive those who have harmed us, their inability to think. To forgive those who have harmed us, their terrible acts which have brought about such needless pain. None of which is to say that we forget what they've done, nor is it to say that there are no consequences to apply. But it is to say that our goal is to forgive them their act and to impose consequences that are designed to improve, to help them develop the skill to act differently, to help them to cultivate the capacity to think, which permits them to achieve a level of mindfulness that can keep them from causing others harm down the road. And so the punishment that we promote for these actions is not punishment that grows out of the desire for revenge, the satisfaction to see the other suffer as have we, but it is punishment designed to promote healthy change, to establish functional boundaries, and to keep those who have harmed from continuing to harm, and those who might be their victims to be safe. I want also to say briefly a few words about those who find themselves filled with feelings of injury and anger that boils and resentment that doesn't leave, judgment of the essence of those who have harmed, and unwillingness to forgive, and dreams of revenge. What I want to say is that those of us who find themselves gripped by this particular constellation of feelings, they are also those who may not forgive themselves, who may torment themselves with guilt for their acts, not able to release themselves from responsibility for what they've done. And so as we find our way to forgiveness of others, so must we find our way to forgiveness for ourselves. And exactly the same tools that permit us to release others are the tools that can permit us to find our way to freedom too. And so we must bring empathic attunement for our context for the situation out of which our own anger arose, compassion for the complexity of that context, love in the form of unconditional acceptance that this is what we did and this is what we do, discernment rather than judgment for the nature of our lives that has brought us to a place where we do what we do and brought us to a place where we did what we did. And ultimately the capacity to forgive us our acts. And if we can find our way through this process, if we can find our way from guilt to forgiveness, then perhaps rather than impose a retaliatory punishment on ourselves, we can do what is infinitely more productive for those we've harmed, and as it happens, more productive for ourselves. We can find our way back to those we have harmed, and we can offer them heartfelt amends. To be able to apologize to those we have harmed, to be able to ask forgiveness from them in return, and to be able to forgive ourselves, permits us to move forward with freedom in our lives, hopefully with an understanding that will allow us to change, to be more mindful in our actions, to be more skillful in the way we engage, to be healthier and more wholesome in the relationships we develop.